The police officer had the weary, hollowed-out look of a man who was standing in the middle of a war he didn't understand, armed with a map that was clearly wrong. On one side was me, a quiet, retired man standing on my own property. On the other side, practically vibrating with a kind of ecstatic, righteous rage, was Brenda, the president of the Willow Creek Bend Homeowners Association. And she was the one with the official-looking binder and the loud, confident voice. "He is threatening me, officer." She shrieked, her voice a shrill instrument of pure theatrical hysteria echoing through the quiet woods. She was pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "This is HOA common land. It is the designated route for our future community nature trail. He is illegally blocking our access, and he is a public menace. I want him arrested." She was holding a crudely drawn, crayon-colored map, a work of pure fiction. It showed a dotted line running directly through my living room. The young officer was looking at her map, then at the professional, sealed, and legally incontrovertible survey map I had just handed him. He looked at Brenda, the screaming, frantic woman. He looked at me, the calm, quiet man. And then he looked at the high-definition security footage playing on the tablet in my hand, footage that showed this same woman and her husband, last week, trespassing on this exact spot with machetes. His face, which had been a mask of professional neutrality, was beginning to harden into one of cold, dawning comprehension. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that perfect, beautiful collision of manufactured lies and documented truth, you have to understand my life's work, and you have to understand the land. My name is David. For 40 years, my world was a world of precision, of unshakable facts, of lines on a map that were as real and as absolute as the laws of physics. I was a land surveyor. I have spent a lifetime walking the boundaries between properties, between neighbors, between what is yours and what is mine. To me, a property line is a sacred thing. When I retired, I came home to the place those lines had always led me back to, my family's old, historic 5-acre property. It was an island of quiet, authentic nature. A place with a rambling old farmhouse, a stand of ancient, 100-foot-tall pine trees, and a clear, cold creek that meandered through a beautiful wild meadow. It was an enholding a piece of land that had been in my family for a century, long before the massive surrounding Willow Creek Bend development had been carved out of the neighboring farmland. My property was not, and never had been, part of their HOA, and the self-appointed queen of this new surrounding kingdom of beige, identical houses and perfectly manicured lawns, was Brenda. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be at war with anything that was not under her direct and absolute control. She was a woman who believed that her desires, the desires of her community, were a force of nature more powerful than any deed or survey. Mapped at her first interaction with me was not a welcome. It was a declaration of intent. She showed up at my door a week after I moved in, not with a pie, but with a blueprint. "Hello," she'd said, her voice a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. "I'm Brenda, the president of the HOA. We are all so thrilled to finally have someone living in the old Henderson place. We have some wonderful, exciting plans for the community." She unrolled the blueprint on my porch railing. It was a professionally drawn plan for a new, extensive community nature trail, complete with gazebos, exercise stations, and decorative lighting. "And here," she said, tapping a red, dotted line on the map with a perfectly manicured finger, "is the most beautiful part of the trail. It will run right along the creek, through this beautiful, untouched meadow. It will be the centerpiece of our entire community." I just stared at the red dotted line. "It was running directly through the middle of my living room, Brenda," I'd said as politely as I could. "This is a beautiful plan. But this meadow, and this creek, this is my private property. It's not part of your HOA." The smile on her face didn't just vanish. It curdled. "Oh, that's just a technicality," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We'll work out the details of the easement later. It's for the good of the community. It's going to happen." She had rolled up her blueprint and marched off, leaving me with a deep and deeply unsettling sense of dread. She had not just made a mistake. She had revealed her entire entitled and deeply dangerous worldview. She believed that what was mine was, by some strange, twisted logic, hers to take. The war began, as it so often does, with paper. I started receiving offers from the HOA to purchase a trail easement across my property. The offers were so insultingly low, they were a joke. They were not good faith negotiations. They were a formality, a box they were checking before they moved on to more aggressive tactics. I refused each one with a polite but firm, legally worded letter, reiterating the private, non-member status of my property. Then Brenda decided to take matters into her own hands. The trespassing began. It started small. I would be walking my own property, and I would find them small. Bright pink ribbons tied to the trees, marking the proposed route of her fantasy trail. I would untie them, my heart pounding with a quiet, simmering anger. A few days later, they would be back. So, I escalated. I spent a weekend putting up large, clear, and very official-looking private property, nitrogen monoxide trespassing signs along the entire perimeter of my land. I thought that would be enough. Surely not even Brenda would be arrogant enough to ignore a clear legal warning like that. I was wrong. A few days later, I went out to find my signs had been torn down, ripped from the trees, and thrown into my creek, a petty, childish, and deeply infuriating act of vandalism. The harassment was now personal. Brenda began a smear campaign in the HOA's glossy monthly newsletter. She wrote a long, passive-aggressive article about hostile, uncooperative, and selfish landowners who were hoarding nature and standing in the way of progress and community wellness. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me. To paint me as the villain in her carefully crafted narrative, my inner monologue was a raging storm. The quiet, peaceful retirement I had dreamed of had become a stressful, ugly, and deeply personal war. Every fiber of my being, the part of me that had spent a lifetime respecting the sanctity of a boundary line, was screaming in protest. This was an invasion. And then I made my move. I installed a comprehensive, state-of-the-art security camera system. High-definition, night vision cameras, hidden in the trees, covering every inch of my property line. Every corner of my meadow, every foot of my creek. If she wanted a war, I was going to have the ammunition to win it. And I was going to give her all the rope she needed to hang herself. I didn't have to wait long. My new, silent sentinels caught them red-handed. The footage was breathtaking in its sheer, unmitigated gall. It showed Brenda, her husband, and 2 other men from her beautification committee on my property in broad daylight. They were not just tying ribbons anymore. They had machetes. They had chainsaws. And the footage showed them, in crystal clear high definition, actively clearing a rough, 3-foot-wide path through my woods, hacking away at the undergrowth, sawing down small, beautiful sapling trees. They were, with their own hands, committing the crime of criminal trespass and felony destruction of property. And my cameras captured every single glorious, damning second of it. I now had her. I had the proof. But before I could even take my evidence to the authorities, she made her final, fatal, and most arrogant move of all. She had her lawyers sue me. The lawsuit was a work of pure, delusional fiction. It was a suit to claim a prescriptive easement and to quiet title. They were arguing, with a straight face, that because the residents of their community had been openly and notoriously using a path across my property for many years, a path that had not existed until they had illegally carved it out of the woods a week earlier, they had therefore established a legal right to it. It was a frivolous, bad faith, and deeply insane lawsuit, but it was also terrifying. It was a declaration that she was willing to use her community's vast financial resources to bury me in legal fees, to try and steal my land not with machetes, but with a corrupt and perverted version of the law itself, and that is what led to the final confrontation. Brenda, emboldened by the fact that she was now suing me, decided that the law was already on her side. She decided to escalate from a secret, illegal act of vandalism to a public and even more illegal act of open defiance. She showed up with her 2 cronies again, this time with her own hand-drawn map of the disputed territory and she called the police. She was going to use the sheriff's department as her own private army, to have me removed from my own land while she and her thugs continued their work. And that brings us back to that moment. The moment on my lawn. The moment she was screaming at the sheriff, pointing at me, accusing me of being the criminal. The moment it felt like her lies, her aggression, her sheer, overwhelming confidence was actually going to win. But I was a surveyor. I was a man who had built his entire life on the quiet, unshakable power of documented facts. And she had no idea about the beautiful high definition and very well-documented facts I had stored on my tablet, the deputy. A young, professional man who was clearly just trying to do his job, was listening patiently to Brenda's frantic, hysterical performance. He looked at her crayon map. He looked at my calm, professional, and recently certified survey map. And then he looked at me. "Sir," he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and frustration. "There is clearly a dispute here. For now, I'm just going to have to ask you to stay on your porch while we sort this out. Of course, officer," I said calmly. "And while you're sorting it out, perhaps you'd be interested in seeing this." I held up my tablet, and I played the video. I showed him the hours of high definition, time-stamped security camera footage. I showed him the footage of Brenda's team tying the first ribbons to my trees. I showed him the footage of them tearing down my nitrogen monoxide signs. I showed him the beautiful cinematic footage of Brenda and her husband and their friends, with their machetes and their chainsaws, illegally carving a path through my pristine, private woods. And then, for the grand finale, I showed him the footage from that very morning, captured by a camera with a directional microphone, of Brenda standing on her own porch, coaching her to cronies on exactly what to say to the 911 dispatcher to make me sound like a violent and unstable threat. The deputy's face, which had been a mask of professional neutrality, hardened into one of cold, hard, and deeply satisfying anger. He now understood. This was not a boundary dispute. This was a premeditated, long-term and criminal campaign of harassment, vandalism, and conspiracy, culminating in the filing of a false police report. He looked from the tablet in my hand to a now silent and chalk-white Brenda. He had seen the truth, the real, documented, and undeniable truth, and he turned to her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "Ma'am," he said, "I think you and I need to have a talk." Down at the station, Brenda was arrested. Her husband was arrested. The two other men from the beautification committee were arrested. They were all charged with a raft of crimes, from simple trespassing to felony destruction of property. And Brenda, the mastermind, was also charged with conspiracy and for filing a false police report. The HOA was, of course, thrown into a state of absolute chaos. Their president, their leader, was a criminal. Their lawsuit against me, which was based on a foundation of pure documented lies, was laughed out of court, and my countersuit, the one I filed the very next day, was not a laughing matter. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the HOA, and against Brenda and her cronies, personally. The settlement was swift, and it was brutal. The HOA's insurance company took one look at my mountain of undeniable video evidence and immediately settled for the maximum amount. The HOA was forced to pay for the complete and total ecological restoration of the damage they had done to my land, a project that was overseen by a team of environmental experts that I personally selected, but that wasn't enough. The violation of my peace, of my sanctuary, had been too profound. And so, as the final, beautiful, and most satisfying term of the settlement, to ensure my future quiet enjoyment of my property, free from the prying eyes and the trespassing feet of their residents, the HOA was forced to pay for the construction of a massive, 10-foot-tall, 1,000-foot-long, solid stone privacy wall, to be built on my property line, separating my quiet, natural world from their artificial one forever. It was a permanent and very expensive monument to their own stupidity. This whole brutal, ugly, and ultimately triumphant war taught me a profound lesson about the nature of boundaries. Brenda was a person who could not and would not respect a boundary that she could not control. She saw a line on a map, a line backed by a century of law and history, and she believed that she could erase it with sheer, arrogant force of will. But some lines, like the ones that define a person's home and their peace, are not so easily erased. She tried to steal a path through my woods, and in the end, she only succeeded in building a massive, impenetrable wall around her own, now much smaller, world. Brenda is facing jail time, and the community is now, for the first time, actually peaceful. But her son, a newly elected city councilman in the nearby city, has just pushed through a new and very troubling city ordinance. An ordinance that allows for the public review and potential municipal annexation of any private, non-member in holding properties that are fully surrounded by a recognized homeowners association. For the purpose of ensuring cohesive community planning and public safety, the fight, it seems, is never really over.